the beginning of this day, I come before you, Lord, not as something I repeat without thought, and not as a routine that has lost meaning, but with the understanding that it is not right for me to move forward without first speaking with you, because everything that follows can take a different direction depending on how I begin. And I do not want this day to be shaped by my own thoughts, nor by what seems convenient or logical to me, but by what is right before you, because what appears right in my own understanding is not always aligned with what is true. There are responsibilities already waiting, situations that may arise without warning, decisions that will require clarity, and moments that will test how I respond. And even with all of that ahead of me, I recognize that none of it should take priority over this moment, because if I do not place you first, everything else begins to fall into disorder, not necessarily on the outside where it is visible, but within me, where my thoughts begin to lead, where my reactions begin to take control, and where I move without being aligned with what is right before you. And I do not want to begin from that place. Your word teaches in Proverbs 3:5-6 that I am to trust in you with all my heart, and not lean on my own understanding, that I am to acknowledge you in all my ways, and that you will make my paths straight. And today I do not want to treat that as something I remember later, after I have already moved ahead on my own, but as something that must be established now, at the beginning, while this day is still unformed, before my mind begins to organize things on its own, before my words are spoken, and before any direction is taken. Father, as I stand before you right now, I recognize that I do not need to wait until I feel ready in order to come to you. And I do not need to have clarity about everything in order to speak with you. Because this is not about my condition, it is about my dependence. And today I choose to begin from that place of dependence, not after things begin to unfold, not when I feel uncertain, but now. Before anything else takes shape, I do not want my thoughts to establish the direction of this day, and I do not want my emotions to determine how I respond to what I will face. Because I understand that when I begin without seeking you first, I end up relying on what I think I understand. And what I understand is limited, what I perceive is incomplete, and what I feel is unstable. And because of that, I choose not to begin from that place, but from what you establish, because what you establish does not shift. Lord, I place before you this day that has not yet taken form, every moment that has not yet happened, every interaction that has not yet occurred, every responsibility that has not yet been carried out, and every decision that has not yet been made, not because I am trying to control what will happen, but because I understand that I am not meant to carry this day on my own, and I am not meant to direct it based on what I think is best, but to begin it in alignment with you. Your word also shows that a man is not in control of his own path, nor is it within him to direct his own steps. And in recognizing that, I understand that beginning my day without speaking with you is not something small. It is a form of independence that places me in a position I was never meant to stand in. And today I do not want to depend on what I can organize, what I can anticipate, or what I can control, because all of that is limited, and all of that can shift. But what comes from you remains steady. Father, I do not want to move forward, and then return later trying to correct what I should have aligned from the beginning, and I do not want to act and then realize that I moved without direction, and I do not want to respond and later recognize that I spoke from impulse instead of from clarity. And because of that, I take this moment seriously, not as something small, but as the point where this day begins to take direction, not because of what will happen, but because of how I begin before you. Lord, I also recognize that beginning the day without you does not always show immediate consequences, but it shapes everything that follows in ways that are not always visible at first. And I do not want to move through this day being influenced by my own understanding when I have the opportunity to be guided by what is true. And I do not want to rely on what seems right when I can align myself with what you have already established. Father, as I begin this day with you, I am not asking that everything be easy, And I am not asking that everything unfolds according to what I expect, but that I would not move independently from your direction, that I would not make decisions based on impulse, and that I would not respond from a place that has not first been aligned with you. Because I understand that beginning correctly matters, more than trying to fix things later. Lord, here I am, before anything else takes place, before anything demands my attention, before anything begins to shape how I think or how I respond, recognizing that this moment is not optional if I want to walk correctly. Because this is not only about starting the day, but about starting it with you, and not allowing anything else to take the place that belongs to you from the very beginning. Lord, as I move forward from this moment, I understand that coming before you at the beginning of the day is not meant to remain contained within a few minutes of stillness, but to extend into everything that follows, shaping not only what I say here, but how I think, how I respond, and how I remain when the day begins to demand my attention. Because it is possible to come before you, and then continue the day as if nothing has been established. To speak words here and then move forward without carrying their weight. And I do not want this to become something separate from how I actually live. Your word teaches in James 1:22 that I am not to be only a hearer of the word, but a doer, and I recognize that this applies even in this moment, because if I come before you but do not allow what has been aligned to remain active within me, then this becomes something I participated in, but not something that truly shaped me. I do not want to disconnect what happens here from what happens next, because the value of this moment is not only in speaking, but in what continues afterward. Father, as the day unfolds, there will be moments that do not give me time to pause, situations that will require immediate response, and interactions that may challenge how I think or how I react. And in those moments, what is within me will become evident. Not what I intended to do, but what has actually been established. That is why I need what has been set in order here to remain, not as something I try to remember, but as something that has taken its place within me. Lord, I ask that what has been aligned in this moment would not be overshadowed by what the day brings, because it is easy for what is external to become louder than what has been established internally. It is easy to begin with clarity and then gradually return to distraction, to begin with order and then move into reaction, and I do not want to drift back into that pattern simply because I allowed what surrounds me to take control of my attention. Your word declares in Colossians 3:17 that whatever I do, whether in word or deed, should be done in your name. And I understand that this is not something that can be applied selectively, but something that must remain consistent, even in moments where I am not consciously thinking about it. Because true alignment is not something that is forced in each decision. It is something that has already been established within, and because of that, it influences what I do without requiring constant correction. Father, I recognize that there is a difference between beginning with you and continuing with you. And I do not want to limit this to the starting point alone, because if I begin correctly but continue independently, then I separate myself from what has been established, and I lose the benefit of what I received here. I do not want to move through this day carrying my own direction after having come before you for alignment, and I do not want to step out of what has been set in order once things begin to move. Lord, as I encounter different situations throughout this day, I ask that my responses would not be formed by pressure, by urgency, or by what appears in front of me, but by what has already been established within me in your presence. Because I understand that what is established beforehand determines what comes out afterward, and I do not want to respond from impulse when I have already taken the time to align myself with you. Father, I also understand that there will be moments where I may be tempted to return to old patterns, to react in familiar ways, or to rely on what seems immediate instead of what is right. And I do not want to ignore those moments or move through them without awareness. Instead, I ask that what has been set within me would remain active, not allowing me to move in the same way I would have if I had not come before you at the beginning of this day. Your word shows in Galatians 5:16 that walking in the Spirit prevents the fulfillment of what comes from the flesh. And I recognize that this is not something that begins later. It begins here, in how I position myself before anything else takes place. If I do not establish that alignment at the beginning, I will be more likely to move according to what is natural to me. But if I remain aligned with you, then what is produced will not come from me alone. Lord, I do not want this day to be shaped by habit, nor by reaction, nor by what feels easiest in the moment, but by what is consistent with what has been established here. I do not want to move in one way before you and then live in another way afterward, because that creates division. And I do not want to carry that division throughout the day. Instead, I want there to be continuity between what I have done here and how I live when I move forward. Father, let this not remain as a moment I experienced you, but as a position I carry, something that remains active within me, not requiring effort to remember, but present in how I think, how I speak, and how I respond. Because what is truly established does not need to be forced. It becomes part of how I remain. Lord, as I step into everything that this day holds, I do not leave this moment behind. I carry it with me, not as something I recall occasionally, but as something that continues to influence how I walk, how I decide, and how I remain, so that what was established here does not fade, but continues to shape everything that follows. Lord, as this day begins to unfold beyond this moment, let there be a distinction between moving through it and being carried by it, because it is possible to go through everything that is ahead without interruption and still not remain aligned with what was set in place at the beginning. What is established before you should not be overtaken by what appears afterward, and I do not want the rhythm of the day to override the order that was set here. Your word declares in Psalm 119-105 that your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path, and that reveals something specific. That direction is not given all at once, but step by step, and because of that, I do not need to see everything ahead in order to walk correctly, but I do need to remain aligned with what guides each step. If I step outside of that, then even what seems clear can lead in a direction that is not right. There will be moments today where movement happens quickly, where decisions are made without warning, and where responses cannot be delayed. And in those moments, what governs me will not be what I said earlier, but what remains active within me now. That is why this cannot stay as something separate, because separation creates inconsistency. And inconsistency leads to misalignment even. When intentions were correct at the beginning, let there be awareness in how I respond, not forced, not artificial, but present, so that I do not move automatically according to what is familiar, but remain within what has already been set in order, because familiarity can feel right, even when it is not aligned. And repetition of past patterns can happen without being noticed if nothing interrupts them. Your word in Romans 12:2 speaks about not being conformed, but being transformed through the renewing of the mind. And that is not something that happens once and remains without attention. It continues, and it must remain active if it is to influence what I do. Without that, I return to what is natural. And what is natural does not always align with what is true. Lord, let there be continuity between what has been placed in order here and what takes place throughout the day, so that there is no division between the beginning and what follows. I do not want to move in one way before you and then operate differently when everything else begins to demand my attention, because that separation weakens what was established. There are moments where distraction does not come loudly, but gradually, where attention shifts without being noticed, and where alignment fades not because it was rejected, but because it was not maintained. Guard against that, so that what has been set does not dissolve into the background, while everything else comes forward. Your word, in John 15:5, makes it clear that apart from you nothing can be sustained, and that is not limited to large decisions or visible outcomes, but includes every part of how I move throughout the day. Remaining is not something passive, it is continuous. and it is not maintained by effort alone, but by not stepping outside of that connection, Lord, as interactions happen, as responsibilities are carried out, and as unexpected situations arise. Let there be a steadiness that does not shift based on what appears, because what appears is not always complete, and reacting to what is incomplete leads to responses that are also incomplete. What is grounded in you does not need to adjust to every change, because it remains anchored beyond what is shifting. There are moments where silence will not be present, where activity will increase, and where there will be no pause to reconsider what is being done. And in those moments, what has been established now must remain without needing to be reconstructed. That is why this is not about remembering words, but about what remains active beyond them. Let there be restraint where necessary, clarity where there would otherwise be confusion, and steadiness where reaction would normally take over. Not because everything is controlled, but because what has been established is not easily moved. Stability does not come from the absence of pressure, but from remaining aligned within it. Your word in Isaiah 26:2-3 speaks of a mind that is kept in peace because it is stayed on you, and that is not a passive state. It is maintained by where attention remains. If attention shifts, then what follows will also shift. And I do not want to be carried by what demands attention, but to remain anchored in what has already been set. Lord, let what has been aligned not become distant as the day progresses, but remain present, not as something that needs to be forced back into place, but as something that continues without interruption. What is sustained in you does not require constant rebuilding, but it does require remaining. So, as this day continues, let there be no separation between what has been established here and how I walk through everything that follows, so that what was said at the beginning is not lost in movement, but remains active, steady, and unchanged, even as everything else around continues to shift. Lord, as this moment comes to a close, what has been placed in order here does not remain behind, because what has been aligned before you is not confined to a space or a time. It continues beyond it, and it carries weight in what follows. This is not a separation between what was said and what will be lived, but a continuation of what has already been established. And I do not step away from this as if it were complete, but as something that remains active. Your word in Lamentations 3:22-23 declares that your mercies are new every morning, and that your faithfulness does not fail. And that truth establishes something that is not dependent on how the day unfolds, but on who you are. Because of that, what I carry forward is not based on what I expect to happen, but on what remains constant. And what remains constant does not shift with circumstance, does not weaken under pressure, and does not change when things do not go as anticipated. There will be moments where what is ahead does not align with what is expected, where direction is not immediately clear, and where what unfolds requires more than what can be prepared for. And in those moments, what has been set within me must remain without needing to be reconstructed. What has been established here is not something that needs to be rebuilt later, but something that continues to hold its place even when everything else begins to move. Your word in Psalm 37:23 declares that the steps of a man are established by the Lord, and that reveals that direction is not formed in the moment, but set before the step is taken. Because of that, I do not need to determine each step on my own, and I do not need to create direction as I go, because what has already been established carries forward into what is ahead, even when it is not immediately visible. Lord, let there be consistency between what has been placed in order, here and how I walk through what follows, so that there is no division between the beginning and the continuation. I do not want to carry one posture before you and another outside of this moment, because what is divided cannot remain steady, and what is not steady cannot remain aligned. There are times where what surrounds me will attempt to define what is real, where what is visible will seem more immediate than what has been established, and where what demands attention will try to take priority over what has already been set in place. And in those moments, I do not want to shift. What is visible does not determine what is true. and what is immediate does not override what has already been established. Your word in Hebrews 13:8 declares that you are the same yesterday, today, and forever, and that removes uncertainty from what I carry forward, because what is rooted in you is not affected by what changes. If what I carry depends on circumstance, it will shift, but if it is rooted in you, it remains. And I do not want to carry something that changes with the day. I want to remain aligned with what does not change at all. There will be moments where attention is divided, where multiple things demand response at the same time, and where what is necessary must be handled without delay, and in those moments, what has been placed within me must remain active, without needing to pause and rebuild it. That is where what has been established shows its strength. Not when everything is calm, but when everything is moving. Your word in Proverbs 4:26 speaks of giving careful attention to the path of the feet, so that all ways may be established, and that reflects something intentional, not reactive. What is established is not left to chance, and what remains steady is not formed randomly. It is positioned beforehand, and because of that, I do not move through this day without awareness, but from what has already been aligned. Lord, let what has been said here remain present, not as something I return to occasionally, but as something that continues without interruption, not requiring effort to recall, but existing as part of how I remain. What is truly established does not need to be forced into place. It continues naturally because it has already taken its position. So as I continue into everything that this day will bring, what has been placed in order here does not fade, does not weaken, and does not become secondary, but it remains as the foundation of how I walk, how I respond, and how I remain, not because everything is controlled, but because what has been established before, it does not lose its place when everything else begins to move. Amen.